You know that moment when the afternoon hits and you think, okay, coffee time, this'll fix it.
Oh, yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Sometimes it just flips that switch, right? And you're good to go.
But then other times it feels like you just drank, I don't know, warm water. Ever wonder what's actually going on inside you when you reach for that caffeine?
It's such a common thing, isn't it? And it really shows how, well, complex our relationship with caffeine actually is.
Mm-hmm.
So for this deep dive, we've gathered some really good sources. We've got a TED Talk that breaks down the basics, some articles digging into why we all react so differently.
From science sites and health pages.
Exactly. And even some, practical tips on how to enjoy your coffee without it messing up your sleep later.
Perfect. Because our goal here is really to cut through some of that confusion, figure out how caffeine actually affects wakefulness, why maybe your friend can have an espresso right before bed.
While you're buzzing after one cup at 10 a.m.
Precisely. And, how to find that sweet spot, enjoying it without the downsides. We're looking for those aha moments.
Definitely. So, where should we start? Maybe just the basics. How does caffeine actually keep us awake?
Yeah, let's do that. We all know it's a stimulant, right? But it's not like it's actually injecting pure energy into us, is it? One source called it borrowing energy, which I thought was interesting.
It's a great way to put it, yeah. To get this borrowing idea, we need to talk about a molecule called adenosine.
Adenosine.
Okay. So throughout the day, our cells are busy working, using energy. The fuel they use is called ATP adenosine triphosphate.
The cell's power source, basically.
Exactly. And as ATP gets used up, a byproduct is created that's adenosine. And this adenosine builds up.
Yep.
And these little adenosine molecules, they go and bind to specific receptors in our brain. Think of them like keys fitting into lock.
And when they bind, what happens?
That's the signal. It basically tells the brain, okay, energy levels are dropping, time to start winding down, time to rest.
Got it. So adenosine is like the brain's natural chill out signal. So where does caffeine fit in? Our favorite pick-me-up.
Well, this is the clever part. Caffeine's structure, its shape at a molecular level, looks remarkably similar to adenosine.
Huh. Like a chemical look-alike.
Pretty much. Because they look so similar. When you drink your coffee or your tea or an energy drink, those caffeine molecules can actually slot into the same adenosine receptors.
Ah, okay. But they don't send the same time to rest message, I'm guessing?
Exactly the opposite. Caffeine binds to the receptor, but it doesn't activate that slow down signal. Instead, it just sits there, blocking adenosine from getting in.
So it's like caffeine is stealing adenosine's parking spot in the brain.
That's a perfect analogy. It's hijacking those spots. So even though adenosine is building up, wanting to tell your brain you're tired, caffeine prevents the message from getting through.
And that's why we feel more alert.
Right. And remember, it's not just coffee. Caffeine's in tea, energy drinks, cola, even some milk teas, which surprisingly can sometimes have more caffeine than a standard coffee.
Wow, really? Good to know. So caffeine blocks the tired signals. That makes sense. It's not giving energy, just stopping us from feeling tired for a bit. What about other immediate effects? Our sources mentioned a few.
Yeah, besides just blocking adenosine, caffeine acts as a central nervous system stimulant. So it can also increase your heart rate a bit, maybe raise your blood pressure slightly.
And mood?
Mood can definitely be affected. It varies a lot. Some people might feel a bit jittery, maybe anxious, especially with higher doses. Others get that feeling of being really alert, focused, ready to go.
Great. And this brings us to something I definitely notice. I have a coffee, feel great. My friend has the exact same coffee, and it's like nothing. Why such big differences between people?
That's a huge piece of the puzzle. And yeah, there's a lot of individual variability. A key factor is how our bodies actually break down or metabolize the caffeine we consume.
Okay, how does that work?
The main players here are specific enzymes in our liver. They belong to a family called cytochrome P450 enzymes.
Cytochrome P450. Sounds pretty technical.
It does, but think of them like specialized cleanup crews in your liver, specifically tasked with breaking down caffeine molecules.
Okay, a little caffeine cleanup cruise.
Yeah.
Got it. So what makes them different in different people?
Well, the efficiency of these enzymes varies quite a bit. How well they do their job depends on several things. A big one is genetics. You literally inherit genes that influence how fast or slow these enzymes work.
So it's in my DNA whether I'm a fast or slow caffeine processor.
Largely, yes.
Huh.
But other things matter too, like your age, your weight, Even gender can play a small role. It all affects how quickly that caffeine gets cleared out.
So if someone has really efficient enzymes, the caffeine doesn't stick around long.
Exactly. They break it down quickly, clear it faster,
Hmm.
so the effects might feel weaker or wear off sooner.
And the opposite for slow metabolizers.
Right. If your enzymes are slower, caffeine hangs around in your system longer. That means you'll likely feel the effects more strongly and for longer. That's often when people report feeling jittery or having a racing heart, even from just a little bit of caffeine.
That totally explains why my friend and I react so differently. It's down to our internal cleanup crew speed.
Pretty much. Your genes and other factors dictate how quickly you clear it, which dictates how much you feel it.
And you mentioned milk tea earlier, that sometimes having more caffeine.
Yeah, it's definitely something to be aware of. Depending on how it's made, especially some chain shop versions, a milk tea could pack a surprisingly high caffeine punch, sometimes even more than a regular coffee. So if you have one late afternoon and can't sleep,
Might not just be the sugar. Could be the caffeine. Okay. Now, what about those of us who drink coffee regularly? Sometimes that morning cup just doesn't seem to hit the same way it used to. Is that just me, or is tolerance a real thing?
oh, it's absolutely real. Your body is incredibly adaptive. Remember how caffeine blocks those adenosine receptors?
Yeah, steals the parking spots.
Right. Well, if caffeine is constantly occupying those spots, day after day, your brain notices there's all this adenosine floating around that can't bind anywhere.
So the time to rest signal keeps trying, but can't get through.
Exactly. And the brain's response is quite clever in a way. It tries to compensate by actually increasing the number of adenosine receptors. It builds more parking spots.
Oh, wow. So it's trying harder to receive that tired signal.
Precisely. It's like your brain is saying, fine, if you're going to block some receptors, I'll just make more. But the consequence is you might need more caffeine just to achieve the same level of alertness you used to get.
Which can lead to needing even more. Which sounds like a cycle.
It can be. You might find you need it just to feel normal or baseline awake, and you can even get withdrawal symptoms like headaches or fatigue if you suddenly stop.
Okay, definitely a caffeine trap to be aware of. So how can we enjoy our coffee, get that boost, but avoid falling into this tolerance trap or, wrecking our sleep?
This is where understanding caffeine's half-life is super useful. The sources generally put the average half-life at around 3 to 5 hours. Let's maybe use 4 hours as a working average.
Okay, half-life. Remind me what that means exactly.
It's the time it takes for the concentration of a substance in your body, caffeine, in this case, to decrease by half.
So after about 4 hours, half the caffeine I drank is gone.
Roughly, yes. And then after another 4 hours, half of what was left is gone, and so on. It gradually clears out.
Got it. So if I want to be asleep by, say, 11 p.m., that 4 p.m. coffee might still be having a noticeable effect because only half is gone by 8 p.m. and only 3/4 by midnight.
Exactly. You can kind of work backwards. Knowing the half-life helps you estimate a sensible cutoff time for caffeine if you want to protect your sleep. One source had a neat comparison.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, comparing like a lower caffeine red tea latte versus a stronger Americano. To have a similar low level of caffeine left by bedtime, you need to drink that stronger Americano much earlier, maybe 7 or 8 hours before sleep, compared to the latte. It really shows how timing matters based on the dose.
Wow. Okay. Timing is definitely key then. What else can we do to avoid sleep problems?
Well, the obvious one is opting for lower caffeine choices later in the day. Decaf is a great option if you enjoy the ritual or taste.
Right. Get the flavor without the kick.
Exactly. And if you're looking for something warm and comforting in the evening, things like warm milk or certain herbal teas like chamomile are often suggested as being more sleep promoting.
Good alternatives. Okay. So we've got timing, lower caffeine options. What about making the coffee we do drink more effective when we need that boost? Is there an optimal way?
Yeah, interesting point from the sources is about timing it before you get super tired.
Oh, like a preemptive strike.
Kind of. Caffeine takes about maybe 45 minutes or so to be fully absorbed and really start working. So if you wait until you're already hitting the wall, feeling totally drained,
It's too late.
well, it'll still work eventually, but you won't get that optimal effect. It's better to anticipate the slump slightly.
Okay, so drink it before I desperately need it. And when does it peak?
The peak effects, that feeling of heightened alertness, generally happen between roughly 45 minutes and maybe up to 4 or 5 hours after you drink it, thanks to that half-life we discussed.
Makes sense. And I think I saw something about a coffee nap. That sounds weird.
It does sound counterintuitive, doesn't it? But yeah, the idea is you drink your coffee fairly quickly and then immediately take a short nap, like 15 to 20 minutes.
Coffee, then a nap. How does that work?
Well, the short nap itself helps to clear out some of that adenosine, the natural sleepiness molecule. And then, just as you're waking up, the caffeine you drank right before is starting to kick in.
Ah, so you get the benefit of the nap-clearing adenosine plus the caffeine blocking the receptors as you wake up.
That's the theory. Some people find it gives them a better boost in alertness than just coffee or just a nap alone. Worth experimenting with, maybe.
I might just try that. Okay, so we've talked about managing the downsides, optimizing the boost, but what about the health side? Coffee gets a lot of good press too sometimes, right?
It does. Moderate consumption, and moderate is key here, has been linked in some studies to potential health benefits. Things like a possibly reduced risk of certain cancers, like colon and liver cancer.
Oh,
Also, potentially lower risk of cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, and there's even some research suggesting caffeine might play a role in weight management, perhaps by boosting metabolism slightly or affecting fat storage.
that all sounds pretty positive for coffee lovers, but I assume there's a catch, like too much is bad.
Absolutely. Moderation is crucial. Too much caffeine can definitely cause problems in the short term. Think insomnia, anxiety, jitters, that racing heart feeling.
Right.
And long-term, really heavy consumption, like significantly more than a few cups a day, has been associated with things like increased blood fats and potentially even a higher risk of cardiovascular issues in some studies. It flips the benefit.
So where's that moderate line, generally? What's considered a safe amount?
Most guidelines suggest sticking to around 3 to 4 standard cups of coffee per day for most healthy adults. That translates to roughly 400 milligrams of caffeine.
Okay, 400 milligrams max. Good
Yeah.
benchmark.
Yeah. And of course, it's also worth paying attention to what you put in your coffee. Lots of sugar, cream, syrups that adds calories and can counteract potential health benefits.
Good point. And ultimately, coffee isn't a substitute for actual rest, right?
Not at all. That's a vital takeaway.
Hmm.
Coffee only delays fatigue. It masks it. It doesn't eliminate your body's fundamental need for sleep. True rest is essential.
That really clicks with the borrowing energy idea. You're not creating it, just putting off feeling tired. So let's dig a bit deeper into that biology. How does it work at the cell level? We mentioned ATP and adenosine.
Right. So ATP is the energy currency. When your cells use ATP for, well, anything, adenosine is left over.
The byproduct.
Exactly. And that adenosine signals the brain, hey, fuel is being used up. Caffeine interrupts that signal, as we said.
But it doesn't help make more ATP. It doesn't refuel the cells.
Nope, not directly. It just stops you from feeling the effects of the fuel gauge getting lower, so to speak.
Yeah.
It's purely blocking the fatigue signal. The only way to actually replenish those energy stores properly and clear out the accumulated adenosine is
Huh.
sleep. Sleep. That's the reset button.
That's a powerful reframe. Okay, and one source mentioned something about morning coffee maybe being less effective because of cortisol. What's that about?
Ah, yes, cortisol, often called the stress hormone. But it does more than that. It helps regulate metabolism, blood sugar, inflammation, and importantly here, it promotes alertness.
Okay. And cortisol levels are naturally higher in the morning.
Typically, yes, they tend to peak within the first hour or so after you wake up, helping you feel naturally alert.
So if you drink coffee right away,
You're essentially adding caffeine stimulant effect on top of your body's own natural peak alertness hormone.
and that's potentially not ideal.
Well, the thinking is that if you consistently do this, your body might start to rely more on the caffeine and potentially produce less cortisol naturally over time, or become less sensitive to its effects. This could, theoretically, increase caffeine dependence and tolerance buildup.
Huh. Interesting. So maybe waiting a bit after waking up might be better.
Some experts suggest that. Based on typical cortisol rhythms, the levels tend to dip a bit mid-morning, say 10 a.m. to noon, and again mid-afternoon, maybe 2 p.m. to 5 p.m.
So timing your coffee for those cortisol dips might be more strategic. Get the boost when your natural alertness is waning slightly.
That's the idea. It's about working with your body's natural rhythms rather than potentially overriding them unnecessarily.
Makes sense. Now, cortisol imbalance itself too high or too low can cause health issues, right? Although that's usually not just from coffee.
Exactly. Chronically high cortisol is linked to things like weight gain, sleep issues, high blood pressure. Chronically low cortisol can cause fatigue, weakness, etc. These are typically linked to underlying conditions, not just daily coffee habits, though caffeine can influence levels temporarily.
Got it. Okay, let's shift gears slightly. There was some really fascinating, maybe slightly concerning research mentioned about caffeine and the brain itself. Gray matter volume.
Yes, that 2021 study. It did find an association between regular daily caffeine intake and slightly reduced gray matter volume in certain brain areas in young, healthy adults.
Reduced gray matter. That sounds bad. Like brain shrinkage.
It sounds alarming, I know. But the researchers were quick to point out a few crucial things. First, they didn't find any corresponding negative impact on cognitive function in these participants.
Okay, so it didn't seem to make them perform worse mentally.
Right. Their theory was that it might represent a form of neuroplasticity, the brain adapting or reorganizing temporarily in response to the constant presence of caffeine.
Adapting how?
The effect was most noted in the right medial temporal lobe, including the hippocampus, a key area for memory. A later mouse study also found some molecular changes there with long-term caffeine. But crucially, the human study suggested these gray matter changes appeared to be reversible
Reversible. How quickly?
relatively quickly after stopping caffeine consumption, based on their findings. It suggested it wasn't permanent damage, but more like the brain temporarily adjusting its wiring.
Okay, that's a bit less scary. Temporary rewiring, not shrinkage. And this was in young people.
Yes, young, healthy individuals. And it's important context because other research, often in older populations, has sometimes suggested caffeine might have neuroprotective effects, potentially lowering the risk for conditions like Alzheimer's or Parkinson's. So it's complex.
That's like complex. Okay, what about the newer mouse study from 2025? The one looking at long-term caffeine and sleep patterns.
Right, that PNAS Nexus study. It looks specifically at chronic caffeine use in mice and its effect on their sleep cycles. A key finding was that long-term caffeine significantly delayed the start of REM sleep.
REM sleep. That's the dream stage, important for memory and emotions.
Exactly. And the delay was dose-dependent. More caffeine meant a longer delay. It also shifted their entire sleep-wake cycle later.
So they acted like they had jet lag, staying up later, sleeping in later.
Pretty much, yeah. A kind of biological jet lag. This likely happens because, as we know, caffeine messes with that adenosine buildup, disrupting the natural drive to sleep.
And delaying REM sleep. That could be bad if you have to wake up early, right? You might miss out on that important stage.
Precisely. If REM is pushed later into the sleep period, an early wake-up time could mean you're cutting that crucial stage short. This might be one reason why some regular caffeine users feel tired even after what seems like enough hours of sleep. The quality or structure might be off.
That makes total sense. Quality over quantity. Did that study find anything else? Brain blood flow?
It did. They saw altered brain blood flow patterns. In the caffeine-consuming mice, there was reduced blood volume during their active times, but increased blood volume during rest, especially REM sleep.
Increased blood flow during sleep. Is that good or bad?
Well, the researchers suggested it could potentially increase the metabolic load on the brain during rest.
Which sounds potentially stressful for the brain?
It could be. But interestingly, they also floated a potential positive interpretation that increased blood flow during rest might actually help the lymphatic system.
The brain's waste disposal system.
Yeah, better clearance of metabolic waste products, which is generally considered neuroprotective. So, kind of a double-edged sword, maybe. Needs more research.
Definitely. And what about heart rate during sleep in those mice?
They found that too. The caffeine mice had higher heart rates and increased heart rate variability during both REM and non-REM sleep.
Meaning their fight or flight system was more active even while sleeping.
That's what it suggests, yeah. Increased sympathetic nervous system activity, which could interfere with getting truly deep restorative rest.
Wow. Okay, so caffeine's effects are really widespread, affecting sleep structure, brain blood flow, heart rate during sleep. It's clearly not just about feeling awake.
Not at all. It's a powerful psychoactive substance with complex biological impacts.
So given all this, what if people want that energy boost but want to avoid caffeine or cut back? Were there non-caffeine strategies in the sources?
Absolutely. One article from Dinja highlighted 3 really effective ones. First up, regular exercise.
Makes sense. Move more, have more energy.
Basically, yes. They cited a study showing that even moderate exercise, like 20 minutes 3 times a week for 6 weeks, significantly boosted energy levels and reduced fatigue. It makes your body more efficient.
And you don't need to run a marathon. Just getting some movement in.
Exactly. Even small things during the workday, taking stairs, walking a bit further to the water cooler, it adds up.
Okay, exercise. What was number 2?
Fresh air. Simple, but effective. Poor indoor air quality, especially with high CO2 levels from poor ventilation, can genuinely make you feel tired. Your brain isn't getting the optimal oxygen level.
So cracking a window or stepping outside can actually help.
It really can. Just a few minutes of fresh air can make a noticeable difference in alertness.
Good tip. And the third one, probably the most important.
You guessed it. Sufficient sleep. It sounds basic, but it's fundamental. Aiming for 7 to 8 hours of quality sleep per night is key for most adults.
Quality sleep, right, not just hours in bed.
Exactly. They also mentioned that short daytime naps, around 20 minutes, can be really effective for a quick recharge. And the core message was clear. If you feel tired without caffeine, your body is probably just telling you it needs sleep.
Listen to your body, essentially. Great reminders. Okay, so wrapping this all up, this deep dive into caffeine, what are the main things we should take away?
Well, I think we've seen just how intricate caffeine's interaction with our brain chemistry is, that whole adenosine blocking mechanism.
Right, the hijacked parking spots.
Exactly. And we've explored why those effects vary so much from person to person, genetics, liver enzymes, all that.
Uh-huh.
We've also touched on practical strategies,
Mm.
thinking about half-life for timing, being aware of tolerance building up.
And the alternatives, like decaf or just plain sleep.
Definitely. And maybe the biggest takeaway is that while caffeine can be a helpful tool sometimes, it's not a magic energy source. It's borrowing alertness, and it can have knock-on effects on sleep quality, maybe even brain structure long-term, though that's still being studied. Understanding the mechanism helps us use it more wisely.
And respecting those foundational things, sleep, exercise, fresh air, is crucial for real, sustained energy.
Couldn't agree more. Caffeine is a supplement, not a substitute for healthy habits.
Right. It's clear it's way more complex than just a simple pick-me-up. Understanding how it works really empowers us to make better choices.
It does. And that kind of leads us to a final thought for you, listening in. Thinking about everything we've discussed today, from adenosine and cortisol rhythms to REM sleep delays and brain plasticity, how might you think about your own caffeine habits now?
Yeah, perhaps consider could adjusting when or how much caffeine you consume potentially optimize your energy, your sleep, and just your overall well-being. Something to reflect on, definitely.